Once, before maps were faithful and kings believed every sunrise was a private blessing, there stood a hill kingdom named Caldera, crowned by wind and encircled by fields the color of old gold. In that kingdom lived Elder Samuel, a former royal counselor whose beard had gone winter white and whose eyes still held the blue of untamed sky. Every child knew him, every soldier sought him, even the ravens perched nearer when he spoke. One summer, his grandson Jonah came to him from the river town below the hill. Jonah had the untested confidence of a bright blade. He ran fast, spoke faster, and carried a secret hunger in his chest, to be great, to be praised, to be the kind of man whose name rang like iron in the mouths of others. "Grandpa," Jonah said that first evening, when the light fell like warm dust through the lattice, "when I grow up, I want to be successful. Tell me how." Elder Samuel did not answer with words. He lifted a small pouch from the table and poured 2 seeds into his palm, polished, amber brown, shaped like tears. He gave one to Jonah, and the boy felt a pulse in it, as if it remembered thunder. "Follow," said Samuel. They walked past the city gate, past the statue of the king on his rearing horse, past the market where olives slept in clay bowls and silversmiths stitched light into bracelets. Up the hill, behind Samuel's cottage, lay a long terraced slope, the old orchard. Walls of stacked stone held the earth as carefully as a midwife holds a newborn. Wind moved there with a listening hush. Samuel planted one seed inside his solarium, a glass house warmed by sun and sheltered from storm. He set it in black soil between mothering ferns where water fell from a copper chain in patient drops. He planted the other seed outside, on the terrace that faced the west, where storms climbed the mountains like wolves and leapt upon the plains. The earth there was stony, honest, unforgiving. Jonah frowned. Which one will grow stronger? Samuel brushed soil from his hands. That depends on what you mean by strong, Jonah, and what you mean by grow. For a time, Jonah spent his mornings with the seed under glass, and his afternoons with the seed under sky. In the solarium, the seedling rose quickly, tender and obedient. Its leaves unfurled like banners on a festival day. Nothing bruised it, nothing dared. It drank because water was always there. It smiled because the sun was never cruel. Outside, the other seedling was slow. Wind bent it, rain scoured it, and once, even before it was taller than a boot, a brown hare chewed its top leaves clean and left a shameless pellet at its root. Jonah's face burned with anger. He built a little fence. He tied the seedling to a thin stake with twine so it might not break in its trembling. "Kindness," said Samuel, seeing Jonah's efforts, "is right. Overprotection is not. Learn the difference. Staking helps a trunk straighten. Wind helps it strengthen." Jonah, who loved Samuel but not paradox, looked away. Summer grew old. The solarium tree grew pretty. The outside tree grew stubborn. And in Jonah's chest, a question hardened like sap. Why must strength be purchased with pain? Why must the outside tree always pay?
In Caldera, there was a custom. Each year, the king held the Trial of Merit, a great public contest where young citizens demonstrated the skills they believed would serve the realm. It was not for prizes alone. It was a lantern held to the faces of the ambitious so the court could see whom to call upon when wars or famines came. Jonah signed his name with a sharp stroke. He would show them he belonged on the mountain among the hawks. He chose 3 disciplines: oratory, archery, and navigation by stars, and began to train. Elder Samuel watched without intervening, which is the hardest kindness of all. Jonah practiced his speech in the solarium. The glass gave him back a pleasant echo. He was brilliant there. Even the ferns seemed to nod. But when he spoke outside, on the terrace by the stubborn tree, the wind stole his endings, the sun made his throat dry, and the hillside answered not with echo, but with silence, which is worse. He shot arrows in the courtyard, and they sang a proud, unhindered note through still air. But beyond the wall, on the slope, the wind batted his fletching, turned good aim to foolishness, and taught him that arrows are loyal to no one who does not understand invisible rivers. He charted stars from his bed, under a ceiling painted with constellations. They were beautiful, tame, and wrong. Ceilings never tell you about clouds. Samuel said nothing. He only kept weeding the outside seedling, which by now thickened at the base, its bark graining into the look of a creature that has told winter no and survived.
3 weeks before the trial, Captain Mara came to the orchard, a woman whose hair was the black of a crow's back and whose stare measured men as a banker measures coins. She commanded the Royal River Guard and was famed for never losing her way, not in fog, not in storm, not in the arguments of politicians. She had come to see Samuel, who had once tutored her when she could not yet tell north from pride. "Who is the hawk?" Mara asked, seeing Jonah stand like a drawn bow. "My grandson," said Samuel. "He seeks to learn the sky's alphabet." "Then let the sky write on him," said Mara, handing Jonah a compass filled with sand. "This will not point north. It's a trick instrument. It will point wherever your fear points. Carry it for 3 days. Learn where it wants you to go." Jonah protested. He wanted real tools, not riddles. But Samuel's eyes were a tide. They pulled him. For 3 days, the sand compass spun toward the solarium. It preferred safety with the desperation of a wounded animal. Jonah, furious, threw it into the grass. He picked it up again, ashamed, and looked down the terraces at the outside tree, which bowed in the wind as if greeting a king it had decided not to obey. "Fine," he said, teeth tight. "Let the outside do the teaching." He took his bow to the terraces. He carried his speech in his throat, not on paper. He watched the sky where it was not painted. The wind bullied him. The sun glared. He missed. He stammered. He got lost under a day moon so pale you'd mistake it for forgiveness. But on the 3rd evening, something small and precise shifted. He felt the wind on his cheek and adjusted before his mind could form the thought. The arrow hummed and struck home. Not luck, listening. He set his feet differently when speaking, letting the hillside's opening swallow his voice and return it gently. He stopped performing at the world and began to speak into it. At night, clouds came and the stars hid, and Jonah, for the first time, did not panic. He smelled the river, noted the moss on stones, felt the temperature drop when he walked into the mouth of a valley. North revealed itself as a conversation, not a command. When he returned the sand compass to Captain Mara on the 4th day, she smiled like a knife returned clean. "Where did it point?" she asked. "To the place I was hiding." "And did you go there?" "I went past it." "Good," said Mara.
That is what maps are for. 3 nights before the trial, the sky went the color of old bruises. Traders in the market flattened their palms and felt the air. Wind ran its fingers through ropes and made every bell speak. The ravens left the city and roosted along the ridge, their black backs all pointing the same way, like soldiers turning their faces to command. "Storm," said Samuel, "the kind that remembers your father's name." Jonah looked at the outside tree, his tree now, though he had not yet admitted it. He thought of its thin stake, its twine, its leaves that had learned the art of surrender without quitting. "Will it survive?" he asked. Samuel lifted his shoulders, a shrug, a prayer. "We will see what it is made of and what you are." That night, Jonah kept watch on the terrace. He wrapped the trunk in burlap, not too tight. He checked the tie, not too stern. He brushed the leaves like a father calming a frightened child. The first spear of rain hit his cheek and tasted of iron. The storm arrived with the reckless confidence of something that had never been told no. Wind roared up the hillside, got its fingers under stones, flipped ladders, lifted barrels, threw them like toys into the stair fields below. The solarium's glass sang. The lanterns went out one by one, like children falling asleep against their will. Jonah bent his back against the wind and shielded the tree. "Go inside," called Samuel from the door. "I can't," Jonah shouted, the words etched by rain. "It will feel alone." Samuel smiled at the kind of foolishness that saves the world. The wind found the tree again. It bent. The stake held. Another gust, the twine groaned. Jonah wrapped his arms around the trunk, cheek pressed to bark, learning the language of trembling. He whispered to it things he had not even said to himself. About wanting to be seen, about being afraid to be weak, about the arrogance that is really hunger dressed in armor. "Bend," he told the tree, "but do not break." Toward dawn, the storm spent itself, panting like a horse that has run too far for too little. The terrace was a mess. Pots cracked, tools lost, soil slumped, but the tree stood, bent a little, wiser a lot. Inside the solarium glowed like a lantern. It had held. But when Jonah walked through the door, he found a film of mildew at the base of the indoor tree, pale threads whispering of a rot that prefers comfort to catastrophe. It was not dying, not yet, but it had been kept too safe to learn to heal. Jonah sat between the two trees, one bruised by fate, one coddled by love, and wept without noise.
The morning of the trial rose clear and merciless. Banners swam from the castle embattlements, the square filled with people wearing their best pride. Vendors shouted the holiness of pears. A drum called everyone to attention, the sound of ceremony's heartbeat. Jonah stood among the hopeful. He felt surprisingly still, like a pond that remembers it has a spring in its heart. Oratory came first. Contestants mounted the wooden dais and loosed words like doves. When Jonah's turn came, he did not carry notes. He carried weather. He spoke about growth. He spoke about strength and how it is not the same thing as winning. He spoke about the orchard, the storm, the night of holding what could not hold itself. He spoke not as a boy pleading to be admired, but as a person inviting others to take off a familiar mask. When he finished, there was no thunder of applause, only silence, then a deep, careful clapping like rain a farmer is glad to hear. Archery followed. The targets had been set in the plain, no walls, no mercy. A crosswind slid its invisible body across the field, flexing the flags like fish. Many good archers lost their hearts there. Their arrows leapt like rabbits. Jonah closed his eyes and felt the wind on his jaw, his ear, his wrist. He lifted the bow differently than he'd trained in calm air. He released not when the target looked perfect, but when the wind's argument resolved. The arrow flew with the tone of a bell and found the red. Navigation was last. The court astrologer unfurled a map with missing pieces, and the competitors were told to plot a route to the southern quarry by day. Clouds gathered to laugh. Jonah walked, tasted the light, watched the flight of swallows, noted the green side of old oaks, and found the quarry less by finding and more by not getting lost. By sunset, the trial was done. The king gave his speech, long like a road with no ends, and awarded merits. Jonah received none of the trophies shaped like lions. He received something stranger: Captain Mara's hand on his shoulder and a whisper that would matter more than bronze. "Stormworthiness," she said, "is what the realm needs. Glory feeds the bards. Stormworthiness feeds the granaries." Jonah bowed. He could feel his inner compass turn a notch towards something that felt like belonging, not to a crowd, but to himself. A week later, word came from the palace. A commission. The southern terraces had suffered landslides after the storm. The king wanted a team to advise how to rebuild the orchard walls so they would hold not against the last storm, but the next. Captain Mara had named Jonah to serve with the engineers. Jonah arrived in the South Country with 3 cartloads of stone, 2 masons who swore at fate like it could hear them, and a civil engineer named Tamsin who wore ink on her fingers and dignity like armor. She spoke briefly and not at all to fools. She showed Jonah the slope. "The old walls failed because they were built against the mountain," she said, tapping a diagram, "not with it. We'll weave the terraces into the hillside's grain. There is a rightness to land that isn't revealed by staring at it from a desk." They set to work. They learned the curves, the secret springs that ran like veins, the fox trails, the places where stones spoke to each other. They placed rocks not only where logic said, but where weight felt honest. Jonah returned each night to his tent and dreamed of roots tying the world together. Then came the temptation, which disguises itself as efficiency. A merchant from the city brought a new mixture, cheap and binding. "You can glue the wall hard as a king's decree," he said. "No need to study the land's old moods." It was seductive. Jonah remembered the solarium and how attractive control had felt. Tamsin studied the sample. "It makes a shell," she said, "strong until it isn't, and when it fails fatally." The masons wanted speed. The schedule wanted victory. Jonah's pride wanted applause. He went alone at dusk to the orchard and sat by a wild pear. He asked the question that matters in every temptation: do I want to look successful, or do I want this to last? When he returned, he told the merchant no. The man shrugged, took his coinless wares, and went off to find a more frightened buyer. They built with patient strength instead. The wall rose more slowly, stone married to stone, with an honesty that made the hillside exhale.
The following year brought drought, not the kind that politely spares the old and very young, but the kind that makes even priests swear in the granary. The solarium tree suffered for the first time. Without the storm's wild pruning and the outside's discipline, its root system had grown shallow, self-satisfied, dependent on a kindness that could not be guaranteed forever. Its leaves browned from the edges in, as if a quiet fire were eating them. The outside tree, now a young tree with authority in its trunk, had roots that had met the dark and not been afraid.
It found water the way good leaders find answers, downward, quietly, without a trumpet. It did not thrive exactly, but it endured, and in a year of parched throats, endurance is a king. Jonah, now serving regularly with Tamsin and Mara, walked the terraces at night, checking the walls, listening for the small lying sounds stones make before they give up. He watered the outside tree with the last bucket when he dared, but more often he stood still and did not save it, which is a different bravery. During that season, a pilgrim came to the orchard, a woman named Abigail Reed, with a scar at her hairline and laughter that sounded like a flute across a pond. She had walked from the desert because, she said, "I am tired of mistaking ease for peace." She sat with Samuel and Jonah, and they spoke of success. Abigail laughed softly. "Success is often a room where the windows don't open. You walk in to be admired, you can't breathe." Jonah thought of the solarium. He thought of the night he had held the outside tree while the storm tested its verbs. "Then what is success?" he asked. Abigail's eyes shone. "Finding out what you can hold without breaking, and what you can let go without hating yourself."
Growth attracts thieves. One dawn, the orchard woke to the sound of shears. In the faint light, they saw a figure moving along the terrace, clipping branches and shoving them into a sack. Jonah sprinted up the steps and met the man at the wall. He was young, desperate, and wrong. Wrong the way hunger makes you. "Please," the thief said, eyes blown wide as a horse in smoke. "My mother is ill. The healer pays for the young leaves to brew a tonic. I took only what I needed." Jonah's first instinct was anger, not moral, but personal. The outside tree had paid for those leaves, with frost, drought, wind. How dare someone take what struggle had purchased? Samuel arrived behind him, breathing like a man who uses his breath wisely. He put a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "Ask him his mother's name." The thief blinked. "Mira." Abigail stepped forward, opening her satchel. "I have coin," she said, "and I have a better tonic." She handed the thief a bundle of fennel, willow bark, and a sprig of bitter root. "Tell the healer Abby Reed taught you the brew." Jonah stared at her. "You're just going to let him go?" "No," said Samuel. "We will escort him to the healer. We will confirm his story. We will plant 2 young trees where he cut the branches, and he will tend them for a season. Mercy and responsibility are twins. Separate them, and they both die." They did as Samuel said. The thief, whose name was Nate, did not run. He walked with them, shame making his shoulders small. At the healer's cottage, Mira lay pale but smiling in her sleep. The tonic helped, so did the quiet that comes when fear is not alone. Back at the orchard, Jonah and Nate planted the saplings where the branches had been taken. Nate watered them with the carefulness of a man who has just understood the price of something. Later, alone, Jonah stood with the outside tree and spoke in a low, almost embarrassed voice. "I wanted to punish him, but the world is not a scale, it's a garden." The tree said nothing, which is how trees teach.
The next spring arrived green and extravagant, as if the land were apologizing for the drought. The outside tree crowned itself with leaves the color of a promise kept. Birds nested. A child, Nate's little sister, sat in its shade and read a book with her lips moving, because joy needs to be said twice sometimes. Samuel declared a new local holiday, the Festival of the First Shade. People came from the town below and from the farms beyond, bringing baskets of bread and jars of olives. Captain Mara roasted fish on a spit and told stories about currents you can't see. Tamsin poured water on the wall to show how it ran properly now, not like a thief, but like a citizen. Jonah stood back, arms crossed, watching the faces of the old and young sharing the same shade. Abigail leaned against the stone beside him. "You look like a man who lost an argument with the sky," she teased. "I did, and I'm better for it." Samuel raised a cup. "To storms," he said simply, "not as enemies, as teachers." They drank. The ravens sent a single breath of sound down the ridge, almost approval.
Word of the terrace walls and the festival reached the palace, as true things do, not by flattery, but by usefulness. The king sent for Samuel, Jonah, Tamsin, and Mara. In the light-filled audience hall, the king spoke frankly. "The northern marches are losing fields to erosion. My ministers offer plans with force, straight lines, fast cement. I want wisdom instead. If the land is a living thing, how do we help rather than subdue it?" Tamsin spread a map. Mara indicated prevailing winds. Samuel told a story about a farmer who tried to tame a river with a broom. Jonah stood last and said one sentence: "Build with what the storms are trying to teach you." Silence. Then the king smiled, which in a king is news. "Then teach us," he said. For 3 seasons they did. They traveled the kingdom, reading slopes like scripture. They trained crews, not to memorize procedures, but to understand patterns. They built an orchard outside every garrison where soldiers could learn patience and repair. They planted 2 trees at every site, one in a sheltered courtyard, one outside, in honor of the lesson that began all this. Children grew up measuring success by how well something held after weather, not how sleek it looked at inspection. Jonah married Leah, a stonemason with hands that could persuade boulders to confess where they wanted to live. They had a daughter who believed walls were not to keep people out, but to keep soil in. She named the outside tree on Samuel's terrace Old Brave, and read beneath it the way some children pray. Samuel's beard went whiter, his eyes stayed blue. Sometimes he and Jonah sat with their backs to Old Brave, watching the solarium tree through the glass. It was still lovely, it still needed help. There was no jealousy between the 2 trees, there was simply truth.
Years passed. On the day Samuel grew too tired to rise, Jonah carried him to the terrace so he could see both trees. The glass kept beauty, and the storm carved elder. Samuel took Jonah's hand and squeezed it the way sailors test a rope. "Do you remember your first question?" he asked. "You asked how to be successful." Jonah laughed softly. He had lines at the corners of his eyes now, the kind of lines you earn with weather. "And you planted 2 seeds instead of answering." "I answered," Samuel said. "It just took you a decade to hear it." Jonah bowed his head. "What is the answer, Grandpa? Now that I can say it without choking." Samuel turned his face toward the outside tree. "Grow where the weather is. Root deep. Bend without breaking. Learn the invisible rivers. Protect without smothering. Give shade before fruit, and fruit before fame." "And when fame comes, prune it." He turned his face toward the solarium. "Keep a place for tenderness, too. Not all things must be tested to be true. But do not call safety success." Samuel slept then, the kind of sleep old men deserve when the world is better for their trouble. He did not wake again.
They buried him at the top of the terrace where the ravens liked to line up like a row of punctuation. On his stone, Jonah carved, "Stormworthy, shade-giving." Below it, in smaller letters, "Teacher of Roots."
The year after Samuel's passing, during the festival of the first shade, a bright-eyed youth approached Jonah with the kind of impatience that sparkles like broken glass. "Sir," the youth said, "I want to be successful, quickly. What is the secret?" Jonah felt the old smile move through him like wind through chimes. He took from his satchel 2 seeds, polished, amber brown, shaped like tears. He placed them in the youth's palm. "Follow," he said. They walked to the terraces, one still in glass, lush as an idea that never met criticism, one outside, scarred by weather and magnificent. Jonah planted 1 seed in the solarium and 1 out where the wind told its long stories. The youth frowned. "Which will grow better?" Jonah looked at the sky, at the stone, at Old Brave's crown moving like a slow breath. Somewhere below, Captain Mara was teaching children how to smell direction. Tamsin and Leah were arguing cheerfully with a rock about where it wanted to live. Abigail Reed was telling a circle of grandmothers that ease and peace are cousins who visit at different times. "It depends," Jonah said, "on what you mean by grow and what you mean by better." The youth groaned. "Everyone in this kingdom answers questions with riddles." "Not riddles," Jonah said softly. "Stories." He placed the youth's hand on the outside seed, on the cool honesty of soil. "If you want glory, go to the solarium. If you want roots, stay here." The youth hesitated, then he nodded as if to someone he wanted to be. He pressed his palm flat to the earth, and for a moment he felt a pulse of the seed, of the hill, of himself. "Tell me what to do," he said. Jonah shook his head. "Do not ask what to do, ask what to be." The boy looked confused, which is how truth first arrives.
Years later, scholars would come to the orchard with ink on their fingers and request a doctrine. They wanted bullet points and binding principles. Jonah, now gray at the temples, would shrug like a hillside that had learned to outlast impatience. But for those who insisted, he would say this: 1. Comfort is a nursery, not a harvest. Keep a place for tenderness, and then go where the weather lives. 2. Strength is not the absence of bending. It is the art of bending without surrendering. 3. Protect without smothering. Staking is mercy. Overstaking is fear in a kind costume. 4. Learn the invisible rivers. Wind, current, crowd, mood. If you can read what you cannot see, you will rarely be surprised. 5. Success is shade given in summer, fruit given in due season, and roots that find water when the sky forgets you. 6. Speed is a trickster. Build slowly with the land's grain. Shells shatter, woven things endure. 7. Mercy and responsibility are twins. Separate them and they both die. 8. When storms come, hold what you must and let go of what you can. Both are courage. 9. When praise comes, prune it. Shade is for others. Sunlight you keep for the leaves. 10. Tell the next one a story, not a rule. Rules end. Stories root. They would write these down, relieved to have something they could test on paper.
But the true students returned in winter and stood on the terrace with their eyes closed, learning the tongue of wind on skin. At dusk, Jonah sometimes took his daughter's hand and climbed to Samuel's stone. The ravens were usually there, like a line of commas in a long verse. Below them, Old Brave kept a large, honest circle of shade where children painted, old men mended nets, women bartered for herbs, and the tired slept without apology. Across the path, the solarium glowed, tender orchids, shy ferns, a sanctuary for plants that do not need storm to be true. Jonah would kneel and press his palm to the earth. He would feel the quiet thunder of roots talking to stone. He would feel the day's heat leave the leaves like a sigh. He would remember a boy who had wanted trophies shaped like lions and had instead learned to love walls that did not fall, trees that did not quit, and people who found one another in the shade. If anyone asked him, then, standing there where weather had made him, what success was, he would answer without poetry or riddles. Success is what remains after weather. Then he would smile, tuck a polished seed into his pocket for the next impatient youth, and walk down the terrace steps, each one a lesson, each one a route.